The wind pressed against her like a living thing, a cold so sharp it felt almost personal. Yet she kept moving to the wideout with her mare beside her. Snow swallowed the landscape until earth and sky became a single pale blur, and still she pushed forward, one gloved hand resting lightly against the mare's neck, as though that touch alone could anchor them both. The mare's breath rose in slow, uncertain clouds, each exhale a quiet reminder that the line between survival and surrender narrowed with every passing minute. They were hours in the cabin when the storm shifted, dropping to a deeper, more punishing cold that made her bones ache beneath layers of wool and leather. She had known winters all her life, but nothing like this, nothing that felt capable of erasing her entirely. She murmured to Mare, soft words shaped more by instinct than intention. The sound steadied her for a moment, though her voice trembled with exhaustion. The mare flicked an ear toward her, acknowledging the familiar cadence even as her steps grew slow and deliberate. They had crossed difficult ground together before, but tonight felt different. The storm carried a merciless silence, the kind that reminded her how far she had drifted from the world she once knew. Out here, no one would see them vanish into the snowdrifts. No one would even know to look. The cold numbed her fingers despite the gloves, and she curled them tighter around the reins. She had left the safety of the cabin earlier than she should have, determined to reach the ridge before the weather turned. Supplies were low, and the narrow valley beyond the ridge offered the only place where dry juniper still grew. It wasn't foolishness that drove her. It was necessity, sharpened by weeks of dwindling resources and the mare's growing fatigue. But the storm came sooner than predicted, swallowing the sky before she could retreat. A distant rumble echoed across the frozen plain, a deep shifting sound that made her pause. It might have been wind moving through a ravine, or the groan of snow settling along the higher slopes. She couldn't risk stopping long enough to decipher it. She urged the mare gently onward, whispering reassurance even as uncertainty thickened inside her. The mare stumbled once, a small but jarring misstep, and she felt a pulse of fear crack through her resolve. If the mare faltered, everything faltered. They needed each other, not out of convenience, but out of something far more binding, shared endurance, shared loss, shared will. Ahead, the world remained a shapeless white curtain. She could not see more than a few steps forward, yet she forced her gaze to keep searching, scanning for any sign of shelter, a shadow, a rise in the land. Snow clung to her lashes, blurring her vision. She wiped at them with the back of her hand, only to feel the sting of frostbite beginning to form. She quickened her pace, fear tightening her breath. They could not linger out here. Not now. Not in this cold. Then, through the swirling veil of ice, she caught the faintest suggestion of structure, something dark, low, and unmoving against the storm. It might have been nothing more than a rock formation, a trick of the wind, but it pulled her forward with a fragile thread of hope she could not afford to ignore. She whispered to the mare again, her voice barely audible, and stepped toward that uncertain shape, knowing that whatever waited ahead would decide whether the night ended in salvation or silence. The structure resolved slowly through the storm, revealing itself as an abandoned hunting shelter half buried beneath snowdrifts. Its roof sagged under the weight of ice, and one shutter hung crookedly from rusted hinges, yet with shelter, fragile, imperfect, but shelter. She led the mare closer, each step a negotiation with the deepening cold. The mare hesitated at the threshold, breath quivering, legs trembling from exertion. She laid a steadying hand against the mare's shoulder, feeling the faint tremor beneath the damp coat. "Just a moment," she whispered, though the words were spoken as much to herself as to the animal. They stepped inside together. The dimness offered relief from the wind, but little warmth. The air smelled of old cedar and dust, a faint memory of seasons long gone. She pushed the door closed, bracing it with a crate whose slats creaked as though protesting the sudden task. The mare lowered her head, exhaling a tired, uneven breath, and she knew the storm had drained more strength from her companion than either of them could easily spare. She moved quickly, rubbing the mare's neck, brushing clumps of ice in the mane, trying to coax circulation back into stiffening muscles. Her own hand stung sharply as warmth returned, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her she was still capable of action. A small pile of firewood lay scattered near a broken stove, left behind by someone who either forgot or never returned. She crouched beside it, selecting the driest pieces and arranging them with deliberate precision. Her movements carried the muscle memory of countless nights spent coaxing flames from stubborn timber. When sparks finally caught and the faint glow expanded into fragile firelight, a thin thread of relief loosened her breath. Heat seeped outward in hesitant degrees, not enough to revive comfort, but enough to slow the biting edge of cold. The mare shifted, hooves scraping lightly across the floor. She watched her companion's tired eyes, seeing not fear but an exhaustion so deep it unsettled her. They had weathered storms together, but this blizzard felt different, sharp, unrelenting, purposeful in its severity. She couldn't shake the sense that it was testing something in her, dragging forward memories she had tried desperately to bury. She pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the immediate truth. Survival hinged on small, steady acts. Nothing more. She found a blanket buried beneath a stack of old tools and draped it over the mare's back. The fabric was frayed, but warm enough to matter. The mare leaned gently into her shoulder, a quiet gesture that stirred emotion she rarely allowed herself to name. Companionship had become both anchor and burden, a reminder of all she had lost and all she still refused to give up. The storm roared outside, pounding against the frail shelter as though determined to invade the fragile calm they had created. She sank onto the floor beside the stove, drawing her knees close to conserve warmth. Her eyelids grew heavy, the fire's gentle rhythm pulling her toward rest, but she forced herself to stay alert. The storm showed no sign of easing. The cabin creaked with every gust, and she knew the structure might not withstand a full night of this punishment. As she listened to the wind claw at the walls, her gaze drifted to the mare, who watched her with quiet trust. That single look steadied her more than the fire ever could. She breathed deeply, preparing herself for whatever the night decided to bring. The storm had cornered them, but surrender was not yet an option. Not tonight, not while the mare still stood. The night stretched on without mercy, each hour carving deeper into the cabin's weakened frame. When she rose to check the mare at dawn's first muted glow, her breath caught. The mare's stance had shifted. Legs braced unevenly, head lowered, nostrils pulling tight with each strained inhale. Cold had seeped too deeply, settling into joints that had already carried more weight than they should. She moved quickly, pressing her palms along the mare's neck, feeling the subtle tremor beneath the skin. The fire had burned low, offering only a whisper of warmth. Guilt tightened her chest. She should have gathered more wood, should have fought harder against exhaustion. Survival did not grant forgiveness for miscalculation. She fed the fire with the last remaining pieces of wood, watching sparks rise like fragile promises. The mare lifted her head slightly, acknowledging the new warmth, but the effort appeared taxing. It frightened her how thin the line between recovery and collapse had become. She rummaged through the shelter again, searching for anything else to burn. Old crates, a broken stool, even a splintered plank from a wall. Each sacrifice left the cabin more vulnerable, yet doing nothing was not an option. The mare's life pressed against every decision she made. As she worked, memories crawled in, sharper than the cold. Another winter, another storm, another life she could not save despite all her strength. Loss had shaped a retreat into the wilderness, making solitude feel safer than hope. But standing here now, sensing the mare's weakening breath, she realized she had never escaped that grief. She had only carried it differently. The mare had become her last tether to meaning, the final piece she refused to surrender to winter's indifference. She knelt beside her companion, placing her forehead gently against the mare's cheek, feeling the warmth fading inch by inch. "Stay," she whispered, though the words shook with fear. The mare's ear twitched, a small but determined response, and the gesture sparked a fragile surge of resolve within her. She could not let despair dictate the day. Not again. The wind outside diminished to a dull murmur, as though the storm itself paused to watch. Yet the cold remained brutally present, seeping through each crack in the walls. She stepped back, evaluating their options with a clarity sharpened by desperation. Remaining inside the collapsing shelter might buy time, but not enough. The mare needed more warmth, more protection, more than this hollow refuge could offer. A faint trickle of light seeped through the shuttered window, revealing the storm's thinning veil. The world outside remained harsh, but visibility had improved. She considered the distant valley beyond the ridge, where rumors of a trapper's cabin lingered like half-remembered stories. If shelter existed there, it might hold everything this place lacked: firewood, sturdier walls, a chance. She brushed the mare's neck gently, testing her balance. The mare shifted, slow but willing. Hope, fragile and trembling, stirred beneath the exhaustion. They could move. Not far, not fast, but together. She gathered her few belongings, wrapped the mare's blanket tighter, and opened the door to the muted storm. Cold surged in, fierce and unwelcoming, but she stepped forward anyway. Behind her, the mare followed with hesitant determination. They left the failing cabin behind, venturing into a world stripped bare by winter. Ahead, the faint outline of a distant structure clung to the horizon, uncertain, fragile, but possible. She fixed her gaze on it, letting the spark of hope guide her into the waiting cold. The journey across the open stretch felt endless, each step an argument against the cold that clung to her with predatory persistence. The mare walked close behind her, placing each hoof with deliberate care, as though measuring the strength she had left. Snow reached their knees in drifting patches, and the wind, though calmer than before, carried a cutting edge that seeped into bone. She moved steadily, refusing to look back at the collapsed shelter that had nearly become their grave. What mattered lay ahead. The faint structure she prayed wasn't a mirage conjured by desperation. As they crested a small rise, the shape sharpened into something unmistakably real, a cabin of darker timber, sturdier than the last, its roof angled cleanly against the wind. Smoke drifted from a metal chimney, pale but certain. The sight struck her with such force she stopped mid-step, breath trembling from more than exertion. Someone was there, someone alive in this frozen wilderness. Hope, unexpected, unsettling, bloomed in her chest with painful immediacy. The mare nudged her shoulder gently, urging her forward. She placed a reassuring hand along the mare's jaw, feeling the warmth that still lingered despite the brutal cold. They continued down the slope, each movement a negotiation between exhaustion and necessity. As they neared the cabin, a dog's bark rang out, sharp and startled. A moment later, the door opened, releasing a spill of golden firelight onto the snow. A figure stepped into view, bundled in layers, lantern raised high. Their posture stiffened at the sight of her and the mare, but it wasn't fear, only surprise, quickly tempered by concern. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in the cold. Instead, she lifted a hand toward the mare, hoping the gesture conveyed the urgency she couldn't voice. The stranger hesitated only a heartbeat before motioning them inside. Warmth enveloped her the moment she crossed the threshold, overwhelming in its suddenness. The fire crackled in a stone hearth, the scent of pine resin thick in the air. She guided the mare to a cleared corner near the heat, the stranger silently helping move tools and blankets aside. Gratitude tightened her throat as she lowered herself beside her companion, pressing her palms to the mare's trembling flank. The mare's breathing steadied by degrees, the worst of the cold loosening its hold. The stranger knelt nearby, offering water and soft-spoken reassurances. Their presence felt careful, respectful, as though sensing the delicate thread that bound woman and horse. She caught glimpses of understanding in their expression, grief shaped in different ways but recognizable all the same. No questions pressed her. Silence served as its own kindness. As the mare settled, exhaustion washed over her in slow, undeniable waves. She allowed herself to lean back against the wall, watching firelight ripple across the mare's coat. The stranger draped a thick quilt around her shoulders, the gesture quiet but profoundly grounding. For the first time in days, her heartbeat eased out of its relentless urgency. The storm outside resumed its distant howl, but inside, warmth gathered with steady intention. She reached for the mare's muzzle, brushing her fingers along the velvet soft skin, and felt hope rise again, tentative but present. Survival was no longer a solitary fight. Someone had opened the door when the world had nearly closed around her. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the moment settle, then whispered a silent promise to the mare and to herself. They would not face the next storm alone.